I'd like to welcome everyone to the Virginia Transit Association's webinar, Transit Projects in HB2. I'm Lisa Guthrie, Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association and the moderator for today. And our technical expert is Jamie Crawford, the VTA Program Coordinator. We've had a few technical difficulties this morning, so we hope everybody will be able to call in. And right now you're just in listen mode, but we are recording the webinar, and it will be available on our website along with the slides for on-demand viewing later. We encourage you to send in your questions anytime during the presentation, and here's how you do that. Look for the webinar panel on your screen and simply type your question into the question box. And although they will be answered at the end of the webinar or the segment of the webinar, you can submit your question at any time and we'll hold on to it for you. And remember that you in the audience is muted, so we'll be unable to hear you during the webinar. Okay, we're going to start out today with a very important presentation that we hope will be very valuable for you with Sarah Rhodes. Sarah is the Principal Planner for the Richmond Regional TPO, and she's going to give us an overview of HB2. I saw Sarah make this presentation last month and thought it was a very clear explanation of HB2, and I hope you'll find it just as beneficial. After Sarah finishes her presentation, we'll ask you if you have any questions about it before we move on. Following Sarah, we'll have Terry Brown from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and she's going to talk more about DRPT's role in HB2 and transit projects. Then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of Terry. Then we'll cover the question that was pre-submitted and move on to opening up for any other questions you may have. Chris Arabia and DRPT staff will answer questions about HB2 and how to move your project applications along. With that, it's our great pleasure that we welcome our first presenter, Sarah. And go ahead and, as you listen to her presentation, submit them during her presentation, and we'll do Q&A after her segment. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to make sure, am I coming in loud and clear?
Yes.
Okay, great. Terrific. All right, well, let's get started. I'm Sarah Rhodes. As Lisa said, I'm a Principal Planner with the Richmond Regional TPO. And so I'm going to give an overview of the HB2 process, and I've refocused it so it's a little more focused on transit and the role of transit within that process. And so throughout this presentation, Jamie has the controls for us, so I'm going to ask next slide. So Jamie, if you could do next slide for me, that'd be terrific. So this is the goal for the HB2 process. This was what was written into the legislation. And Jamie, I'm just going to have you hit the next buttons a few times to show the important elements of all of this. I'm going to read this because this is important to keep in mind when considering HB2. If you keep this in mind, you'll probably get the purpose of what's going on with all this. So the General Assembly declares it to be in the public interest that a prioritization process for projects funded by the Commonwealth Transportation Board be developed and implemented to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the state's transportation system, transportation safety, transportation accessibility for people and freight, environmental quality, and economic development in the Commonwealth. So right there, there's the goals. That's why we're doing all this lovely hard work. Next slide. So this is another structure. This I took directly from VDOT during their 6-year improvement program process for the recently approved 6-year improvement program. VTrans 2040 is the state's long-range transportation plan, which is currently under development. That is how this process is planned. HB2 is how it's scored. This is how projects are prioritized and scored, and then HB 1887 is how it's funded. That is how funding has been restructured in the state of Virginia to more effectively fund transportation improvements. Can you hit the button 2 more times, Jamie? This process only applies to discretionary state and federal funds, the HB2 process. So I'll go into a slide later of what funding that actually applies for. If a project does not address a need identified in the VTrans 2040 document, it is not eligible for HB2. So that the VTrans 2040 long-range plan is very important for the HB2 process. Next slide. So this is the HB2 anticipated biannual or yearly cycle. The CTB will actually be considering whether this process is annual or biannual at the September 15th or 16th CTB meeting. Simply put, this looks similar to what we're used to with the 6-year improvement program. However, there's a lot more work up front in the August and September timeframe. But some things remain the same. The draft 6-year improvement program will be out in February for consideration in April. We'll have public hearings in the April timeframe, and the CTB will be making its decision about it in the June timeframe. Next slide. So HB2 changes the way projects enter the 6-year improvement program. So this is how we are used to things. The concept of a project is developed, is considered by the CTB, and goes into the 6-year improvement program. At that point, a lot of the work happens to define the project and get that project designed, right-of-way purchased, and construction started. Next button, Jamie. The new process has that high-level estimate, but then more work is done to define the scope and the cost estimate. The project enters the HB2 scoring process, then is considered by the CTB for inclusion into the 6-year improvement program. So that black line indicates where the project will enter the 6-year improvement program, and you see there's a lot more work done with projects ahead of that. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of non-exempt funding pots that are part of HB2. So Jamie, if you could just hit the button a few times. So you've got National Highway Performance Program, Surface Transportation Program, the CTP formula for high priority projects, CTP formula for private partnership projects, high-tech infrastructure improvements, various bond proceeds, and state formula funds. These are funds that are not exempt, so any project that will be funded with these funding sources will have to go through the HB2 process. So projects that are eligible on the transit side of things, there's sort of 3 overarching transit components: bus transit, rail transit, and TDM. And then underneath that, you have the specific types of projects that are eligible within the HB2 process, and they're listed out here. I won't read through all of them, but it's a pretty robust list. It's a good opportunity for transit projects and improvements. Next slide. Applicant eligibility. As I mentioned earlier, if you're applying for an HB2 project, your project needs to meet a need identified in VTrans 2040. That's one of the elements of eligibility. The other thing you need to do if you're a transit entity is if you're applying for a project that meets a need on a corridor simply significance, you simply put that's a highway or something that's highway adjacent, or a regional network, which simply put is any road within an MPO. If your project can help meet a need on either one of those networks, in order for that project to progress to the HB2 process, one of the factors it needs to have for eligibility is it needs to get approval by the regional entity that it affects. So if you have a transit improvement, say you want to do a bus line extension, you on a regional network, so any road within the MPO area, you would need to get approval from the MPO. You talk to me, that resolution would be developed, and the MPO would approve it. This year's time frame, resolution of endorsements for HB2 process are being considered at the September 8th Technical Advisory Committee meeting, and they are being considered for approval at the September 24th Transportation Planning Organization Board meeting. So there is that element that needs to be considered for HB2 applications. Jamie, if you could hit the button, it just highlights where transit agencies need to focus their efforts. Next slide, please. So the scoring factors. This is a general overview of the scoring factors, and Jamie, just hit the button a few times. We've got safety, congestion, accessibility, economic development, environmental quality, and land use. These are the 6 overarching factors that are considered when scoring any HB2 application. The HB2 policy goes into a tremendous amount of detail with regard to the data that goes into all of these and who's responsible for what data. But the goals are, simply put, safety is to reduce the number and rate of fatalities and severe injuries. Congestion is reduce person hours of delay and increase person throughput. Accessibility is increase access to jobs and travel options. Economic development, support economic development, improve the movement of goods, and improve travel time reliability. Environmental quality, improve air quality, and avoid impacts to the natural environment. And land use, support transportation efficient land development patterns. Next slide. So there are two main pots of funding that are part of the HB2 process, and this was defined as part of HB 1887, which I mentioned in the beginning. High Priority Project Program. The total amount for that project program is $649 million. The eligible projects include projects on corridors of statewide significance and regional networks. Eligible applications include, or applicants include all applicants, regional entities, localities, and transit agencies. And additional notes I should add are all applications for this program are compared at a statewide level. So if you were to enter an application for HB2 for the High Priority Project Program, your project is being compared to projects in Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, Roanoke, so it is a statewide comparison. The Construction District Grant Program is sort of the other side of the funding process. The total amount in this program is $649 million. The Richmond District is anticipated to get $93 million. Eligible projects are projects on corridors of statewide significance, regional networks, UDAs, urban development areas, and safety assessed projects. That safety assessment is part of a VTrans component of developing the list of 100 most unsafe intersections and 100 most unsafe road segments based on crash data within all of the VDOT districts. So if your project is located, corresponds to one of those identified locations, you can apply for that resource. This is the catch. Only eligible applicants for Construction District Grant Program are localities. That shuts out both regional entities, such as the TPO, and transit agencies. Additional notes, this program is only compared at the district level, so projects that go into this program are only compared to other projects within the district. So instead of, City of Richmond competing with Northern Virginia, you've got City of Richmond competing with Chesterfield County and Mecklenburg, those sorts of things. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to reinforce the point, Jamie, if you could go ahead and hit the button, that this is the only program that transit agencies are eligible to participate in, but the Construction District Grant Program is still a resource with working with localities, so that's important to keep in mind. Next slide. And that's the end of my presentation, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
At this point, wait a minute, did a question just come up? Okay. Okay, here's a question, Sarah, pertaining to Construction District Grant Program.
Okay.
For safety assessed projects, it sounds like only roadway projects will be considered. Are there any measurements for transit safety improvements?
The safety assessed projects, if you go to the VTrans 2040 website, there's a map that identifies the projects that are have been identified as high priority safety locations based on crash data. Currently, the safety assessment came onto the scene for HB2 in May and was approved for consideration in July. This is a late addition to the HB2 process. It is not specific who, while the safety assessment is only part of the Construction District Grant Program, which seems to be focused on roads, it is not specific as to how the safety need can be addressed. It doesn't say, this type of improvement will address the safety need. If a transit improvement can address the safety need and a locality is willing to submit an application, I think there's malleability there. But a lot of these things are not specifically nailed down. So at first glance, it seems to be road specific, but there's nothing that language-wise that specifically defines it to considering roads only.
Okay. All right. Sarah, could you speak to the HB2 scoring factors and how they vary by location? In other words, the Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads #1 priority being congestion relief?
Sure. I can do this to some degree. Simply put, different geographic areas in the state of Virginia have different priorities. So while we may think of Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, their biggest transportation priority may be congestion relief. That factor and that weighting, that push towards congestion relief, doesn't apply in a lot of other places in Virginia. So to deal with these, that individual or that regional or local transportation needs, a series of factors were created, weighting factors were created. There are 4 main categories which weight all of the 6 transportation performance measure factors differently. So Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, of course, their highest priority is congestion. And so that they are in category A. Other portions of the state, including Richmond, have really pushed accessibility, economic development, and safety as their highest priorities. So they're in category B. A few other locations are in category C, and D is really mostly about economic development, which is the most of the state. So simply put, the needs of the Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads area aren't being blanket applied to the needs to the rest of the state. There is a specificity. What that factorization does is it takes those 6 categories and applies percentage points to them, which once the projects are scored, they are normalized through those weighting factors to a point of 100, to a ranking score of 100%. And so you score, for example, if Northern Virginia submits an application and Richmond submits an application, Northern Virginia may have the same amount, the Northern Virginia application may have the same amount of points in safety as the Richmond application, but when you go through the weighting factors, that safety will not be as valuable to Northern Virginia as it will be to Richmond, because Richmond has ranked safety higher than Northern Virginia as part of the rating factors. So it's a chance to make sure that each location, each region in the state is really addressing its needs the way it wants to and competing, trying to address those needs.
One last question about that, and that is who's doing the evaluation? Ultimately, the Commonwealth Transportation Board will make the final decisions, but tell us a little bit about the scoring evaluation before it's presented to the CTB.
That is an excellent question with a complicated answer.
Okay.
Eligibility. To get into the HB2 process, eligibility of identifying a VTrans need and making sure you've got all your ducks in a row to even have an application in the HB2 process. That is being done by the Office of, OIPI, or the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. They will be working with the consultants who helped establish the VTrans needs to determine if a project meets a need identified in VTrans and is even eligible to go into the HB2 process. So that's team 1. Once it's in the HB2 process, the most complete answer I've gotten with regard to who will be scoring the applications are technical teams within VDOT districts. So VDOT districts will be scoring applications, and as I understand it, doing outreach to various agencies, DRPT, to, for example, to get more information about a project and the need that that project may meet. That is the best information I have at this time. That information is not yet defined in the HB2 policy guide. So DRPT might have more to add on that when they speak later.
Okay, we have one last question here for you, Sarah. that was submitted. This one, and I'll just read it as it was submitted. The scoring factors point directly at transit for the larger metros. No city has widened their way out of traffic, but it will take a couple of decades to build out and realize the benefits. In the immediate, roads appear the easier choice. How do we break this cycle?
Wow, that is a big question that I'm not sure I have the answer to.
All right.
That is a huge issue with transportation planning well beyond the HB2 process.
Right.
That said, I think HB2 does a decent job of refocusing efforts towards transit and the value of transit. I think it does show that transit can meet needs that roads can meet, and I think it is a good first step. One of the things that Nick Donahue and the Secretary's office have been saying is HB2 is a first step to creating a prioritization process. So I think it does start to move the focus towards valuing transit more. But yes, that is a very big issue that I don't know that HB2 solves.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And we will now move to Terry Brown from Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation to offer some more specifics about DRPT's role, and then we will want you to submit any questions you may have of Terry. Welcome, Terry.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, Sarah gave a really excellent, cogent presentation of this, and I appreciate that, Sarah. One thing that I do think may have changed since you last heard about it, Sarah, I don't know, but transit agencies actually are allowed to apply for district project funding. So we worked really hard on HB2. First of all, I agree with Sarah's representation of the Secretary's Office and VDOT. It's been a truly collaborative process. If you've been around long enough, you know that that's a rare thing. So I really appreciate that part of it. But we are able to apply for anything in the district program funding as well as the statewide funding. In fact, except for a very few specific types of projects, we really are anticipating that most roads and transit projects that people are going to apply for both, because except for a couple of individual types, you can apply for both. So we're expecting that most people are going to hit all those boxes. Secondly, just a couple of things that came up there in your presentation. The scoring, you were actually right on about OIB. They're doing the yes/no, what we're calling screening, to say there is no V-Trans need, this doesn't address safety, whatever is going to get you in or out. These scoring teams are actually have been formed, and they will not only be technical teams within the districts, but also headquarters, and there will also be a DRPT person on each team. As of right now, the teams are being formed around each of the factors, and so we have a congestion mitigation team, we have a safety team, and so we'll have hopefully what are going to be basically subject matter experts, as opposed to saying all of the VDOT scores are being done by VDOT, all of the DRPT scores are being done by DRPT. So we're going to have people from both agencies looking at all of the applications that make it through the screening process. And then the last thing that came up in Sarah's presentation was about the really good question about how do we get past the road bias. And of course, we're all aware of that being there. I really believe, as Sarah said, that we have worked very hard to get the measures and factors to be sort of mode blind. So one of the requirements of the legislation was that all of the factors have to be appropriate for all modes. And it's been quite a struggle to do that, especially with, I mean, we're going everywhere from freight rail to park and rides, you know, so, but we have worked very hard to get that to happen. One of the things to the question that was asked specifically is land use issues. You know, we started talking about how VDOT scores land use with their modeling, and VDOT, of course, is more of a reactive construction project. They are building roads where the demand really already exists, and that would be trying to build out of the mess. But for transit, with something like a streetcar project or a park and ride or something like that, we're building to try and increase the accessibility in the future. And so one of the examples about how we're trying to make the measures work for transit is that we are using future land use and accessibility numbers as opposed to what exists right now. In other words, if we build the BRT here in Richmond, what are we expecting to change along that route? And what do the plans support as far as the forecasting, as opposed to how many businesses exist right now within a quarter of a mile, that kind of thing. So, so those things being said, please let me know if any of that wasn't clear. About safety. Oh, about transit not being able to apply for safety? Yes, we can apply for safety projects. And Chris is in here too, Chris Arabian. He was pointing out that there are two measures under the safety factor, and one of them, transit automatically gets 100% on, just for existing. So, so we actually have a pretty good leg up on safety. Chris, do you have anything to add for just in general for TDM projects, which we think are going to score pretty well as far as any type of special projects, maybe some capital, but we can also cover not ongoing operations, but maybe getting a new bike share, something like that in there. So did you have anything specific to add, or just want to see if we have any questions? Okay. Are there any questions that we can answer? I'm sorry, there was one more thing I wanted to cover. When you guys were saying, you know, about the working with the grantees. So here's the real story. These applications are due on September 30th at midnight. Well, 11:59, I guess. So, but we do not recommend that anybody come in at 11 o'clock on September 30th and start working on this. There is a great deal of modeling and plans and trying to get captured data that is very, very specific, arcane data, some of which we can't do, but VDOT is set up to come help us. And we are going to need time to do that so that we can help your projects look as attractive as possible. So if you are, we've already got some grantees working with our rail folks to get their application in the right format and making sure that we have the right data and that sort of thing. We are here to help you all during the summer, well, what's left of the summer, and in September. But we are a limited staff, and VDOT is getting a lot more applications than we are, so they're going to be pressed for time as well. So the earlier that you can start, the better, because we are trying to be helpful up until the scoring starts, and then we'll be really, you know, just pedal to the metal trying to get all the scoring done before the middle of December when our efforts are due. So the really important issue is earlier better, and reach out to either your project manager on my staff on transit, or Chris, or you know, Amy Inman and Nick Britton in the planning section, or Jeremy Latimer, who's our rail administrator. We need to be involved as soon as possible to make our projects show well, if you will. So now I'm done.
Thank you, Terry. Very informative. We've had one lengthy question that was submitted, and if you'll bear with me, I'm going to walk over to the screen and read it to you. Okay. does the applicant have to specify the particular source of funding that it is vying for with its proposed project? Or is it sufficient that the project qualifies for HB2 scoring, leaving the question of which funding source it might receive as a matter for the evaluators and the CTV to decide?
Yeah, that's a good question. They do not have to, HB2 is a cobbled together pot of funding, and the only question that you will have to answer is statewide pot of money or district, and as I said earlier, we're expecting most people will say yes to both of those. And then the other question will be, can you take federal funding on this project? A lot of the HB2 money is federal. I know VDOT has been working on that and maybe trying to get a little more state money in it. But a lot of it, and of course it's all highways type money, it's all from FHWA. So being able to take federal for a project will increase your chances of receiving funding. So that would be good, but no, you do not have to say this is high priority or bridge repair or whatever. We don't need that level of detail from anybody.
Okay, Terry, one other question. So going back to the update that transit projects are eligible for the Construction District Grant Program now, so is it likely that applications will be sent in for both of these, for the high priority and the Construction District Grant Program, the same project application?
Yeah, you have a button, you'll have two radio buttons to check which ones you want to apply for. Almost all projects are applicable for both of them. So I'm expecting that most projects will have both of those checked. So that's just the safest way to go, really.
Okay. At this point, I don't have any other questions submitted, Terry. So we'll move on to the one question that was pre-submitted and then see if there are any other questions overall of any of the presenters. Okay, this question was the parties interested in learning more about the DRPT telecommunications grant opportunities through HB2. Is there a telecommunications aspect for grant application?
Yeah, this is Chris Rabia. So what I understand that question came from the Middle Peninsula CDC, and specifically, they're looking at telework center for their residents. They don't have to travel all the way up into Washington D.C. for their jobs, because in their area they have broadband issues. So in general, yes, those types of programs or projects would come under transportation demand management type of things. And I think they're eligible. In fact, this one in particular sounds very intriguing to me, and I will certainly follow up with those folks to help them through the application process. But yes, so there are opportunities for telecommuting programs, telework programs would be eligible.
Okay. If there are any other questions, please submit them now. Okay. I hope this means everybody understands everything. So anyway, we will at this point continue to offer additional support for our transit agencies and HB2 process. We will be focusing on HB2 at our next VTA board meeting on Wednesday, October 21st. It will be at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it will be over at the state capitol. And Deputy Secretary of Transportation Nick Donahue will be making the presentation, and it's open to all VTA and CTAV members. You don't need to be on the board to participate in the presentation, so we hope that we will come and we will see you there. So with no additional questions, I just want to again thank all of our presenters, Sarah, Terry, and Chris, for joining us today and helping us get a handle on this fairly complex process that's already underway. So this last slide that we put up provides you with the contact information for the panelists, And it concludes the webinar. So we will be posting today's webinar on our website in case you would like to refer back to it. And we thank you for joining us today. Thank you. Goodbye.